there's wild opportunity because the amount of federal resources that come to your community is unprecedented. It's perverse because it's so terrible. It's such a tragic and devastating thing to happen. And the amount of resources available allows us as a local government to truly dream.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand, and I'm joined this week by Zach Semke. How are you going, Zach?
I'm doing well. How are you, Matthew?
Pretty good. Looking forward to getting stuck into the new year very shortly as we wrap up 2025. But it's great to have these great interviews, which we have another one this week from Jay, and it's good to have you back with us again, Jay.
Great to be here. Busy month for the podcast with me.
Busy month as people are winding down. But I always like to have some really good things to listen to while a lot of the other stuff slows down while I'm having a bit of a break over holiday period. So that's all good. We're a bit of a change of pace this week with an interview from a very motivated, very collaborative go-getter who's actually a politician. And I really like this. I'm a bit of a politics junkie as well as a building science junkie. So this is kind of a great listen, and I found it really interesting to talk about how to get messages out there, how to motivate people. But before we get into that, I've got a few people to thank. Zach?
Yes, we do. So a big thank you to Icon Windows and Doors for being our sponsor of the week and making everything possible for us here at Passive House Accelerator. A big thank you to our stakeholder partner as well, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you too to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
Great. All right. Well, Jay, this is a bit of a local connection for you. Tell us a little bit about Maggie Ullman, and tell us a bit about Asheville too.
So, I guess to start, I'll do a bit of the backstory about how this interview came to be, which is that Maggie is a councilwoman for the city of Asheville here in North Carolina, population of around 92,000. So, a small to mid-sized city, and she'll get more into how the the politics of that works and the actual setup of the government. But she had gone to Greenbuild a couple months back in Los Angeles, and I follow her on Instagram as I follow a lot of local politicians, and saw that she was there, and I thought, what the heck, I'm gonna send her a message and say, I saw you were at Greenbuild. I work with Passive House Accelerator. Would you like to sit down for an interview? I'm one of those people who thinks the worst thing that can happen is they say no, or more likely they don't respond. And she got right back to me, actually. And so we set up the interview and did this, and I don't know, talked about, obviously her experience at Greenbuild, but a little bit about Helene and kind of her background working in sustainability and government, the kind of crossroads between the two. And yeah, it's a very unique interview. As she'll mention, I don't want to steal her thunder, but she says that there's why people, what people, and how people. And I feel like a lot of us working at the accelerator and who are in high performance are more what people, and she's more of a how person. So it's kind of a unique perspective.
Very much. All right. Well, let's get into it. This is Maggie Ullman, and we'll have a catch up after this interview.
Hello, my name is Jay Fox. I am a co-host with the Passive House podcast. I am here today with Maggie Ullman, Councilwoman with the City of Asheville here in North Carolina. Maggie, thank you so much for taking the time to join.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, jumping right in, I'm curious about what's your professional background and how you came to do what you do.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, especially for the podcast that you're focused on, because, you introduced me as a city councilwoman, and I love that role. But I get to wear multiple hats because city council folks in Asheville are part-time, so we all generally have to work. And my professional background, I think, really informs my leadership as a councilwoman.
Mhm.
So I'm a climate advocate where I work with national nonprofits and foundations, and I build coalitions around climate change. Previously, I was the City of Asheville's first sustainability director.
Mhm.
So Asheville was the first city in the South to start a program like that. And so I really cut new trail for the region. Then I found that the path of cities doing this was really growing. And so I founded a nonprofit that now has 110 cities collaborating on their sustainability and climate work called the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network.
Mhm.
And then I moved on. When I left City Hall, I started my own small consulting practice where now I work with national organizations on this coalition building and how do you take really good ideas and scale them so that you have a lot of different organizations working shoulder to shoulder towards the same type of goals or outcomes? Because I think a lot of times our work is closer to each other than we realize. And if we put time into building those coalitions, I've just seen the outcomes soar.
That's fantastic. And I mean, working with high performance building groups and passive house groups, definitely see the same thing, where oftentimes we're a lot closer than we think.
Absolutely.
It seems like you were always involved in local politics, but when did you make the jump to being an elected official? And what kind of, I don't know, what spurred you to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. From when I worked in City Hall as a staffer back in my 20s, also my first internship in college was for a local council person working on fair free transit policy. So I've kind of had a passion for local government. I think local government is the grassroots of government. And so I just really feel connected to it. But I shifted into pursuing the policymaker role really as we were turning out from COVID into what would come after that. And like many folks, when you make a big decision like running for office, it's a family decision because it changes your time and your dedication. And so when we were coming out of COVID, both my husband and I had already decreased some of the work that we were doing because we had to care for our 5-year-old and didn't really have another method. And so once we stabilized and, I guess 9 months into 2020, and we were like, okay, we aren't drowning and we have a support system and we can fill our time back with work. I
Mhm.
kind of said, what if I didn't fill it with consulting work? What if I filled it with service? And it was a big question my husband and I thought of. So it was really kind of an opportunity type of moment of I see bandwidth that isn't claimed and where am I passionate about and where do I want to put that time? And so that I decided the end of 2020. Then I ran and won in 2022. So I've been serving for about 3 years.
Okay, cool. And this is pardon my ignorance about Asheville city government, which I should know more because I live
Yeah,
here. I mean, are there term limits or are you free to go as long as you like?
great question. Both the mayor and city council are elected for 4-year terms. There are
Mhm.
no term limits, but my first term is ending. And so actually just on Monday, I officially filed to run for re-election in 2026. So now I have about a year to continue serving and campaign to win my seat for a second term, which I really hope to do.
All right, cool. Well, you got my vote.
Oh, thanks.
You got it. Moving on, so the reason I initially reached out to you was actually I saw that you had gone to Greenbuild on Instagram of all places, and I was like, that would be a really cool concept to reach out to her and talk. So I just want to, I guess, go over your experience at Greenbuild and speak, from the perspective of an elected official. What were some of your takeaways? And then again, as perspective as a coalition builder, as you've said, what were some of your takeaways from that?
Yeah, it was a true honor. I've wanted to participate in Green Build for some time.
Mhm.
Back when I was a sustainability director for the city, I was much more immersed in our lead building policy, our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and then all the projects required to reach those goals. And so it kind of been on my wish list. And after Hurricane Helene, we were invited, the mayor was invited, and she said, "Hey, Maggie, I think this might be a better fit for you to come and present." And it was a panel with other elected officials from communities who have survived disasters.
Oh, wow.
And I found that really powerful because I feel like the audience and participants of Green Build are people who many times have been spending their entire careers trying to build a future that prevents things like this. And they're doing really good work. Many of us are, yet these disasters happen. And so this year at Green Build, there was a pretty robust theme around community resilience beyond just individual building specs, but then also kind of the layer of disasters. And so what I found really interesting from it was that as I sat with a senator from Hawaii and a staff person from Seattle who's had real concerns around heat, and leaders from California who have experienced countless disasters, there was this perverse thing where once you've had a disaster, there's wild opportunity because the amount of federal resources that come to your community is unprecedented.
Yeah.
And so it's perverse because it's so terrible. It's such a tragic and devastating thing to happen. And the amount of resources available allows us as a local government to truly dream
Mhm.
in a way that our local property tax base can never enable, really. And so that was something that ended up feeling really hopeful to me to sit with other peers who've experienced this devastation and go, huh, we could actually cut new trail for other communities on not only how to recover, but how to prepare and prevent things like this in the future.
I mean, honestly, that's a great message. Having gone through what we did it a little over a year ago, it was terrible, but I mean that is kind of a silver lining is that hopefully the rebuilding process, something positive can come out of it.
Yeah. You know, this is not a perfect metaphor, but it reminds me of my dad had a heart attack at 49, and it was very frightening. And he recovered, but he lived a lifestyle that included stress and diet and lack of exercise that culminated in that at a very early age. And it was horrific and tragic and scary. And then he proceeded to right size his life and start to live knowing what's really on the line because that heart attack gave him that wake up call. And so he, has proceeded since then to have a lot better exercise and health and stress management, all these things, and had a much more holistic, healthy life after that. And so I think about that sometimes as there's many folks that went to Greenbuild that probably listen to this podcast who have dedicated your whole lives and careers like I have to preventing these type of things, but sometimes communities are still getting these wake up calls, and it's never too late to right size and pursue the truly sustainable opportunity.
I think I read this on social media. That's like every disaster movie starts with a scientist screaming to the public and nobody paying attention to them. Um,
Yeah,
and so speaking of our audience, there's a lot of folks who are kind of like
yeah.
that. And if they are one of those people and they want to reach out to local government, what's maybe a more effective way of doing it rather than, just like I'm about to give bad examples. I'm not going to do that. But just what is an effective way to kind of go to local government and be like, look, I'm a legit building scientist and I think that these changes would be really effective. And like, how do you get someone to listen? How do you get kind of engagement with elected officials?
Absolutely. I have so many different ways I could respond to this, but I think you're focusing on like if you're from more, I'll call it like the technical side of things, there's a
Mhm.
framework that I often think about. It's, are you a why person, a what person, or a how person? And I think why person, people are often these visionaries that really understand what needs to happen. A lot of times they're the activists and advocates. The what people are often the academics or technicals that go like, well, I want that why, I want that vision. Here's what technology we should use. Here's what methods we should use. And then the how people kind of work in between all of it and negotiate and compromise and come up with the processes. And, if you're kind of in that what category, it can be really frustrating, I bet, to be like, no, no, we have the solve. Just do it. Here it is. Let me hand it to you. And I think a lot of times politicians can be that how person. And so what I'd say is, if you've ever done sales or marketing, put that hat on, learn who the elected officials are, kind of scope out what their priorities, pay attention and watch what they vote on and how they vote at a city council meeting to understand what drives them and make it personalized because most cities have small city councils.
Yeah.
So it's not like in Asheville, there's 6 council folks and 1 mayor. You can do 2 hours of market research before you put in 2 hours into your email to us, really, and understand. So one is just understand that these are individuals and try and understand how they work. The other thing I'd say goes back to where I've spent a lot of my career is coalition build. Different decision makers process things differently. I tend to be very analytical, balanced with deeply following my intuition. And one person's analytical data backed email might hook me on one topic, and one person's emotional, personalized story about their neighborhood experience might hook me a different time. And so, if you really want your voice to be effective, one voice is much smaller than 15, and having a diversity of perspectives and approaches, I think, can go a long way.
I love that. And that kind of leads to the next question I had, which is more of for organizations that are, say, either local or national, but they're kind of large organizations and they want to make a push. They have a specific policy agenda. It's not really that same emotional kind of pull as an individual might have. Like, how would they kind of help build a coalition with a local government to maybe get something done?
I think it's always important to understand who you want to collaborate with first before you understand where you want to go, right? And so, some could call this opposition research, know your enemy. Or in a world that I want to live, it's like, here's a metaphor I use a lot of times. Jay, if I called you tomorrow and said, hey, I want to hang out, let's go get dinner at this Chinese place on Thursday at this time, it's very easy for you to just say no for a million reasons. 1, you might not like Chinese. 2, you might not be ready. 3, you might not be a dinner person. 4, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But if I said, Jay, I really want to spend more time with you, I think you're cool and it would be fun to hang out. Now, the possibility of what we could do is huge. And it means that you might say, I'd rather go for a walk. And I'd go, cool, I like walks too. And suddenly we're on a walk together. And so sometimes people come in an isolated place with a hyper specific target and not a lot of room to co-create what they're working on. And so if you come in and say, we have a 100% clean energy policy. If an organization comes in and said, we want you to reprogram dollars to subsidize the cost of heat pumps, go. Yes or no? That gives me a lot less flexibility as a decision maker to say, well, we're already trying to partner with our state clean energy fund. And right now, our council coalition really focuses on our low income communities. I could then say, would you be okay if we wanted to focus only in our low income communities? It was a subsidy from us and a loan from the state, and it's broader than heat pumps, then you might say yes. But I think if we come in and get rigid around one thing and one thing only, that it's more likely to fail. And so coming in with a broader idea and then co-creating a specific is where I found the most collaboration to be the most productive.
I like that too.
That was a long answer.
Well, no, it just made me actually think of, and this might be a little off base, but the group of other southern cities that you've worked with, and
Yes.
that coalition, and when you said heat pumps, that just made me think, are there any specific policies that have been just really, really well received, no matter where the community really is? I don't know. I've seen that local solar is done really well in Alabama, but then you think of Alabama and you'd be like, there'd be no way in hell that they'd be into that. And you're totally wrong, because if you're meeting them where they are, they're
Yeah.
very open to it. I don't know, have you seen any that are kind of, I don't want to say universal adoption, but just a bit more favored than you might think?
That's a fantastic question. I do think that there's been some trends, I'll call it, in local policy adoption. Trends like setting lead building standards for government buildings, trends like setting renewable energy policy targets for government operations and for community operations. I think this bridges well to the meeting people where they are concept, where when it comes to this technology, I don't know if there are a lot of universal. And a lot of times I see people really struggle is they'll come to me in North Carolina and say, like, here's this amazing policy from Evanston, Illinois, go do it. And I'll go, cool. In our state regulatory context with our state investor-owned utility, that's actually illegal. And so sometimes folks want to find a silver bullet, but when you get to local policy, the context matters. And so there's not a lot of stuff that can dock from California to North Carolina or North Carolina to Vermont. And so having a generalized idea and then partnering with technical folks, like probably people listening to this podcast, to say, okay, this technology really doesn't fly in the South because here's our heating and cooling load context or our weather cycles. I'm trying to think of an example, but yeah, I think that specialization matters.
Got it. Yeah, I'm just now I'm thinking Ithaca up in
Yeah.
New York has this like ridiculously ambitious plan to go totally electric for all their buildings by like 2035. And it's just like that rules. That's great. It will never work in so many different places.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, especially with power stuff, like I could be wrong. And I'm curious, like anybody who knows more, email me. But I almost think that Ithaca might have combined heat power, like a major steam system in the downtown, in which case, like that could totally work.
Yeah.
Or if you're a municipal utility,
Mhm.
those type of goals are much more feasible. But in my context, we get power provided by the largest investor-owned utility in the country, Duke Energy. And
Mhm.
so like that's not as easy. And so that's where it's like understanding your local profile will give you your range of possibilities, really.
Okay. And that I think that leads into the kind of the next question that I wanted to ask, which is about sadly about limitations. I know it's kind of negative, but just so maybe folks have a more realistic option or idea of what can actually happen, which is so like what are some of the limitations that local officials face when trying to enact policies about like climate, and then are there some potential ways to overcome those challenges?
I think having really clear civic understanding of what a municipality's role and charter is a really important grounding first step. So I'm going to reframe it from limitations to kind of what are the strategic possibilities, right? And
Yeah.
so, um, like I just mentioned, if you are like the city of Austin and your elected officials oversee your electric power utility, your range of potential is much bigger than if you're in a community like Asheville or Charlotte or Raleigh or Roanoke, where there's a private investor owned utility who has a state utility regulatory body over it. It's just different.
Mhm.
And so you need to understand those type of things. So understanding like what is in the jurisdiction of the city in the first place. So I think that is an important thing to understand. And I think also it's really important to understand like getting real with yourself about the size and scale of your city. We live in a world with so much information. And when it comes to the local level, most of the information is produced by and about our biggest communities that have access to media. And so I know that thing in LA is cool. LA is like 4 bajillion times the size of my small city in Asheville or Madison, Wisconsin. But if you live in those cities, that's a different play. But there's
Yeah.
6,000 cities and there's like maybe 25 that are over 2 million. I should fact check myself, but
I don't think it's even that high. I
I'm
think
trying to give the scale,
yeah.
right? And so I think that's important to understand. And so to be effective, right sizing the possibility, I think, goes a long way. And I think that's where some of the limitations come, is that we have neighbors and people like ourselves who see a better world and a world that we're building and have big vision. And it's a world that we need and I want to participate in. But we need to like calculate who's going to take responsibility for what.
I think that's fair. And that's
Very pragmatic. That's part of my DNA. Um, I also have been really effective. So anyway,
well, you're one of the how people, which is,
I'm a how. Yeah.
and that's great to have because I think a lot of folks listening are what's.
Which is great. Like we every seat on the bus needs to be full. You
Mhm.
just need to figure out what your seat is and be authentic. I tried to be a wet person. I worked in a water quality testing lab as an undergrad, and I don't know how they didn't fire me because I am not a chemist. That level of precision is not for me. But in the policy world, I've really thrived. So you got to find your seat on the bus, and then I try and surround myself with other types of people so I'm balancing out my thinking, my approach, and my strategy.
And I guess I want to get to kind of specifics of North Carolina and Asheville and kind of the relation because um, sometimes there's not a ton of wiggle room because the state has basically said this is what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
Um, and I know this is going to be different for folks all over the country because every state's a little different. But just in Asheville, I mean, what are some of the like specific you mentioned Duke that there's things you just can and can't do. With the state, is there kind of similar list of things that you run up against?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of places that don't have home rule, is
Mhm.
what you call it. A lot of cities won't. And or there is state preemption. And so North Carolina has a heavy hand where the state legislature has a lot of authority over what cities can and can't do. And so we often call it a mother may I state. I think Virginia, maybe Michigan is one as well. So there's a handful of us that really need to go to the state legislature to seek permission. For example, something that we are pursuing soon, like on the agendas in February, is to pass local legislation to enable commercial PACE, which is property assessed clean energy, where you can borrow money for resilient and renewable and energy efficiency stuff.
That's
And the
great.
loan can be tied to your property. So if you sell it in a couple years, you don't have to pay it off. This allows people to make investments that have longer payoffs than the real estate turnover cycles.
That's
Super nerdy policy.
yeah.
Super. We haven't been able to do it because the state didn't have give us enabling legislation, but we're pursuing it because now we have it. But we've been caught on this for years trying to pursue this as a financing method that's been to fill a gap. And so that's an example of something where you need that enabling legislation. So I think that's important to know. There's plenty of states where that's true. If you are in a big city where they call it to, you have a strong mayor. Strong mayors is like the big cities, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, where basically that mayor acts as like the governor of the city. The rest of the cities, all 6,000 of them, are typically council manager forms of government where the elected bodies vote together, but there's an executive city manager that's hired. It's just a completely different form of government. And the reason I jumped to that is that if you're in one of those strong mayor cities, it's very likely that you won't have as much challenge with preemption from the state. But if you're in everywhere else, that's a needle that you really have to thread.
Well, so I want to jump a little bit into Helene and our experience following that, because again, a lot of folks listening to this are probably new of Asheville from that wonderful article in the New York Times that said Asheville was a climate haven, if
Yeah.
remember that map. That didn't turn out to totally be the case. Turns out everywhere is potentially vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, so just kind of from your experience, and maybe again, there's limitations, but like I guess what realistic options do you think local governments have to prepare, and what maybe a bit more pie in the sky options would you recommend if you had, if you had it your way?
Yeah. A couple things. I think your point that I think the concept of a climate Haven is not, it's an oxymoron. I don't think it exists. I think Asheville was billed as that. We've seen many people move here citing that as their reason because they are coming from disaster areas like yourself. We actually did a lot of things right. We had a climate resilience plan. We built redundancy in our water main coming from our biggest water treatment plant, and both of them got completely wiped out. We built a second spillway on our water treatment plant. Like we did a lot within a relatively small budget for a community our size.
Mhm.
And so that just underscores that climate havens are not something we should be thinking about. And really, the main theme that I've learned from Helene is that we fundamentally need to think about how we bend instead of break,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
there will never be enough government money. Property taxes could never be high enough to prevent these things, to fully protect us from the type of damages we're experiencing. And so, what does bending instead of breaking look like? What does it look like where buildings are higher or out of the floodplain? What does it look like where, in Asheville, one of the things that I'm really proud that we had done and now we're going to double down on doing is we've been building what I call an emerald necklace of parks around our vulnerable river areas. And so some of our best park areas are right around our high flood prone areas. And now we have to rebuild them after Helene, but they're going to be even better. And we're getting federal dollars to do it. And so I think the what folks out there, you're screaming at your phone right now, listening to the podcast, like we know, like it's not that we haven't invented the solutions, it's the will and it's the resources. But I think, when I think of something that I'm dreaming about, because we now have federal resources that can help us, I think about this emerald necklace of parks that can really have beautiful, healthy riparians for excellent water quality, that can be meeting places that are free for families to spend time with their loved ones, for people to exercise, to build communities. Like we had done so much already, and that will come back. I also think a lot about, because in Asheville, one of the unique things about our disaster was just the catastrophic infrastructure failures that happened, and our water quality, our water drinking water plant, and the amount of damage we experienced to that. So we're thinking a lot about what redundancy can look like in distributed water systems. It's very difficult. We live in a mountainous region, so we have a lot of very technical complications, period, to providing drinking water. Like imagine pumping 3 million gallons of water up a 6,000-foot mountain. Like for real, it's hard. But what does redundancy look like and what does distributed systems look like fundamentally? Because if you live in such a crazy mountainous area where having universal communications between mountain ranges is difficult, where having water pumped everywhere is difficult, where having road systems, we're having renewable energy, what does it look like instead of having one massive plant that could go down and everyone's vulnerable to having distributed systems?
I think that's great. I think you really hit the nail on the head with benefits of decentralization. And I do think that this emerald necklace is really a fantastic idea for so many reasons. Just as a resident of Asheville, it's really nice to have a park system that everyone can be proud of. I do want to move on to a slightly more controversial subject, which is about planned retreat. In the aftermath of Helene, it kind of became clear that a lot of parts of Asheville that have been developed are in danger of being inundated by floodwaters. And again, I understand that this is a sensitive topic and oftentimes there's no right answer, but I just want to hear what you think about planned retreat in the context of Asheville.
I think planned retreat is a very intellectual idea for an extremely human problem. I think I think there's real value into it as a high level concept,
Mhm.
but it might end there. What it's signaling is that we need human migration to change and move out of these vulnerable areas. And to that, I think is important. I think
Mhm.
insurance companies will actually have a bigger hand in deciding that than anybody.
Yeah, they definitely
But
will.
at the human scale level, I don't think it's a real practical policy to look to local government or state government to enact, because there's too much wealth and personal value tied up in it. And so I think we don't kick out the idea. I think we keep it as a high level concept, but it'd be hard for me to imagine just drawing a whole neighborhood and saying, we're going to relocate you. We're from the government. Trust us. I just don't
Yeah.
think that's gone well in the past. I don't think that's really politically feasible.
Okay. I agree with that. And I mean, I immediately think of certain red lines that were drawn,
Yeah,
how that went, and we're still dealing with that 100 years later, well, 90 years later. So,
we are. But
yeah.
if it's embraced like as a concept, right? Like so say like in cities we do comprehensive plans, which are basically like 20, 30-year vision documents.
Mhm.
I think we need a refresh on the idea because planned retreat like came out with a very prescriptive and lacking human empathy concept that if the idea is more that we want safe human migration, that's very different.
Yeah.
And over time you can incentivize those type of things, but like it can't be a swift broad brush to be successful. I would love to see someone email me after listening to this podcast and give me information to help me evolve my thinking, but that's where I am.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I think that there can be nudges
Yeah.
that
Well,
hopefully,
there's like nudges. Charleston, South Carolina does some really interesting stuff for long range planning.
Mhm.
And they've been hit by multiple disasters that they're using the hazard mitigation grant program with the federal government. And they basically say, like, here are nuisance flooding and recurring flooding areas. We have a long range plan that, like, when property comes for sale, the government will buy it. That's great.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's different than like, hi, I'm coming to the neighborhood and we're going to use eminent domain to like kick you out. Like, come on. But if you say like, we as a city have a 50-year, 20-year, 30-year goal that we will opportunistically turn this stuff into parks or back to wildlands or whatever, that's a different story. That's a really different thing. But planned retreat has been pretty narrow, I think.
Okay. I love that idea, by the way, of, something
Yeah,
to happen.
I think
Because
that'd be great.
I mean, going back to Helene, two friends were celebrating their 10th anniversary in Charleston, and we were supposed to meet them. And even though Charleston was essentially fine during Helene, he was close to the water. He was saying that streets were flooding, I
Yeah.
mean, like a
Yep.
foot of water, and it's just like
It
normal,
happens all the time in that city. Yep.
which is insane.
And Charleston has been doing a lot. It's a pretty interesting coastal community. Now, you got to be really real that coastal community and sea level rise is so different than mountainous flooding from hurricane weather. I mean, and so you need to address it appropriately, but it's it's pretty crazy.
Okay. Cool. Well, I mean, keeping with Helene, and I guess let's go more positive here. What has been, your favorite success story that you've seen following Helene, whether it's, a family that did something great and really great things came following, or, a policy or an organization like Beloved or something.
Yeah, I think it's maybe less something extremely specific and more an experience of, remember this happened in, September 27th, 2024, and early November of that year was a presidential election. And so in an alternate universe or in a community just 200 miles away, citizens were immersed in a nasty and fearful and intense presidential election. And in the wake of the storm, the divisiveness wasn't there. It was a unifying experience, and I feel like everyone had the same goal in mind, which was to care for each other, to survive, and to rebuild. And that type of unity was very powerful. And there's a great book called, oh, I'm going to forget the name of the book. I think it's
It's a building in hell,
Heaven Born in Hell
yeah,
or
building paradise in hell or something like that.
yes, 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 yes. A paradise built in hell. I think when I think of the some of the most positive, hopeful things I experienced after this disaster was really genuinely working bipartisan.
Mhm.
Asheville is a city surrounded by small rural communities We are progressive and Democrat, and we have very small rural, often Christian and often Republican communities, and we worked hand in hand with each other. And to experience that at a time when we were having a very contentious national election, when normally these type of leaders would never collaborate, but we were collaborating more effectively than any other thing I've done. That type of cohesion was really powerful. The other thing I found really powerful was how, we didn't have communication for many, many days. And when communication started coming back online into our community, we were starting to see that there was like a lot of really nasty misinformation and a lot of making this partisan, making this political. And what was extremely clear to me is that like that call was not coming from inside the house. It was someone on their keyboard with their own water, with their own electricity, who is not us, who wasn't part of this with an opinion that, quite frankly, I had no care to listen to. But what it told me is that, like, it's really easy for someone to sit there detached from some war in another country, some disaster in another state, some political concept at the federal level, and have a really big old opinion without any context. But in the community, we were so unified. In the community, we were taking care of each other, and it was profound. And I hate that we had to have this experience to see the truth of how much we love each other and want to care for each other, but you can't unsee that. And the goodwill that extends between neighbors and party lines and the urban rural divide, like I can't unsee that. I can't forget that we actually have a lot more in common than sometimes people want us to believe.
I think that that is a great way to take, great takeaway from the experience, which honestly I had kind of the same
Yeah,
experience.
it's
Um,
wild. It was
yeah,
really special.
I don't like there's yeah, lots of people I've never spoken to. I'm in a fairly large apartment complex, and we
Yeah.
got to know each other pretty much that Friday and that Saturday.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
um, largely because we had to go get water out of our pool to flush our toilets, so
Yeah,
everybody started hanging out there.
absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I hope that we can all maintain a teensy bit of that connection to our neighbors over time.
Well, so I guess speaking, still going with the recovery, what have been
Mhm.
kind of some of the unfortunate obstacles that you've run across working with the city, and like how have you overcome those? And maybe that's a lesson for, unfortunately, when this happens to the next community, like what advice would you kind of give them so that they can get over that obstacle and not deal with it?
Yeah. It's really important for local representatives to turn from being the decision maker to an advocate
Mhm.
because we now have to be advocates for our community to the federal government. The amount of lobbying that I'm spending my time doing to our federal government and to federal agencies, we just had never had the need or whatever before. And
Yeah,
so that's a really different thing, right? You're used to like, give me the information, I will discern, let me go in the community, let me get information. And now it's like, I'm an activist to the federal government. And so that's just different. And
yeah.
so the patience, and when you have a disaster like this, they give you a 6-year window to spend the money for a reason. This stuff takes a long time. And so that's one of the things that's hard is on our last question, we were talking about the community cohesion and the community spirit. And the reality is, disaster amnesia strikes fast. As soon as people got water back for some, they felt like this was over. I'm still working with people who are still displaced. This is not over. This isn't over for our water department, who we're still nervous. Actually, hurricane season just ended at the end of November, and we all had a huge sigh of relief. So recovery takes so long that it can become old news. And then right now, we're also having some people starting to get frustrated. Like some of our park systems just aren't ready to reopen. And we're getting emails like, what the heck? When
Yeah.
is Carrier Park going to be open? And you're like, well, when we asked you all, you said that you wanted us to rebuild more resilient, even if that took longer. That was a unanimous, not unanimous, but that was like 90% of the survey results.
Yeah.
So it's taking longer. But that's just a hard tension. That's a hard tension. So I think preparing for the long run, I think as leaders, maintaining hope for yourself and your community
Mhm.
um, is hard. I mean, we all just this was the most traumatic thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I think for many, many, many of us,
Yeah.
it is the same. And so, being kind with ourselves as it takes a while to like fully recover ourselves as well as our community is really important to think about too. I mean, it's the worst hurricane since Katrina when it
Yeah.
comes to death toll. Like, I don't like being compared to Katrina, but it's real. It kind of validates how terrible it was. But some of the most like powerful testaments to humanity came from this for me. And so I just try and hold on to those.
And that was Maggie Ullman, who is part of the local government in your home, Jay, of Asheville. Really great interview there. Maggie's obviously done a huge amount of work in the community as a consultant and a business owner, but also, really strong advocate and lots of experience in collaboration and bringing people together for her goals, and is also has a big interest in the environment
Yeah.
as well as equity. So some really great stuff there. Tell me a little bit about, we mentioned at the top about Asheville and sort of population, but
Mhm.
and Maggie turned up to Greenbuild. Is where does sustainability sit, or things like Passive House in the context of the city? Is that something that would be a bit left field for the city of
It
Asheville?
Unfortunately, it's similar to California, where you think of California as being this kind of progressive bastion within the United States, but if you look at passive house adoption, it's relatively slow there, and it's because of how temperate the climate is. So that's a similar issue we have here in Asheville, where we're pretty far south, but we're also in the mountains. So it doesn't get too hot. It rarely gets too cold. Although we did just have a very, very cold, pretty severe cold snap. But so
Yeah,
it hasn't been, there's people are eco-conscious, let's say, but when it comes to building, Passive House hasn't really gotten much of foothold in here quite yet.
yeah,
So
yeah.
when I saw her there, I figured it was to do with Helene and the idea of having to, we have to rebuild quite a bit. Helene, just in the state of North Carolina alone, cost $60 billion worth in damage. Asheville
Mm.
was kind of the hardest large city hit. Swannanoa is probably hit worse, but it's relatively small. And so I just figured that maybe we could be a foothold for more green building, although I don't know if that's going to be the case given how the state has set up the ability for us to kind of make our own building code.
Is there more talk of resilience and being a bit more robust for future events?
Yes, and that's we had the conversation about planned retreat, which is a tough conversation. I think this was left on the cutting room floor, but my background is I'm originally from the Detroit area, and Detroit was a city of 2 million back in the 50s. It is now a city of 600,000, and that means you have to give services to, what would that be? Significantly less than half of the population, but
Yeah,
spread out. And that costs a lot of money. So people want to say, okay, you're the sole house on this block. You should give up your house and consolidate. And of course, nobody wants to do that because that's
mm,
horrible. And it's a similar problem here where you're in a problematic area that might get flooded again, but it's your home. And you can't, as much as that's potentially you're just going to have this problem again, you can't ask people to leave home. And that's I believe it's an intellectual problem without a human solution, I think is how she put it, or somewhere along that. And that's one of the issues that we're dealing with. But
yeah,
that's I think that's the main issue of resiliency. But she also talks about the emerald necklace around the river system, building parks rather than structures, which is I think a great idea. And maybe
yeah,
borrowing from Charleston's idea of when properties that are potentially in this kind of flood area come onto the market, the government has kind of first dibs on it.
yeah, yeah. You mentioned at the top about the why people, what people, and how people, and the fact that a lot of us in the technical realm are what people, wanting to dive into the technical of how to solve problems, advocates being the why people, and then the sort of politicians or people who work on the compromise and collaboration and actually get things done, the how people. And that was, I really like your pretense to that, which was all good science fiction movies starting with a scientist screaming at people with the data and trying to get their attention. And I really like the way you frame that question of how do we get people to listen? And it was an unexpected answer, which really focused on understanding who you're talking to and what motivates them, and it making it about the listener rather than the talker. And she gave that example of spending a bit of time just looking into someone's track record or finding out about what has historically motivated someone, or what they're posting about, what kind of things that are important to them. And I mean, this is kind of sales 101, but from a public policy point of view, or just effective communication, that idea of communication being what the listener does, and really understanding what's going to motivate someone. I think we often don't do that, particularly us what people just assume that more facts is going to do the job, which is seldom the case.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Adding more statistics to a paragraph that's already too long isn't going to change someone's mind.
Yeah.
So.
So really great stuff. And I think it was great change of pace. Really great to hear from someone of Maggie's experience and her position, in a role now of a responsibility, but just also her passion and dedication to collaboration and building a better city. So, really great to hear. And it's really, I think it's just encouraging. It's a nice way to go into 2026, knowing that there are people like her fighting the good fight, and we can all learn from that. So thank you very much, Jay. Great that you were able to reach out and that she said yes.
Yeah, no, that was kind of a surprise.
All right. Well, this I think is our last pod for the year, Zach. But what have we got coming up?
Indeed, yeah. So happy 2025 ending, and let's look forward to a great 2026. On the Passive House Accelerator, we are kicking off the new season of Passive House Accelerator live with on January 7th. I'll be presenting a keynote style presentation at live, which will touch on solar eclipses, cyanobacteria, solar panels, the Falcon Curve, and a call to action that I first heard from the founder of the first Earth Day, Dennis Hayes, who mobilized 20 million people for environmental progress back in 1970 in that first Earth Day. And it's all about our community taking a leap in our work in 2026. So I hope people will join us for that. It'll launch also a 10-day challenge that we'll be doing to help people think about the growth and the leaps and stretches in their work that they want to make. And we're doing a whole bunch of stuff in the collective around that. That's our theme of the month in January. So we're really excited about what's coming. And we've Kim Davis, our producer, and Michael Ingui, and we've been brainstorming and planning for a very fun 2026 with a bunch of Reimagine Buildings conferences as well, and some great presenters on the Passive House Accelerator Live. So just really grateful to be able to be working with you guys on the podcast and everything else with the accelerator, and really happy that we've got this community and this, all the listeners who are listening to the podcast and folks who are showing up and making these conversations so rich and fun. So
yeah, nice. All right. Hey, well, thank you, Zach. And it's been a big year for the Reimagine. There's really great stuff going on over there. So if you haven't, definitely check that out, as well as Accelerator. Some really great articles written by yourself, Jay. Some really good work, and I'm looking forward to a lot more in 2026. Thank you all. Thanks for listening, and we will be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.